You don't belong in first class, Susan Whitmore screamed, her hand striking Danielle Jackson in the face. A dry explosion echoed throughout the cabin, as if tearing apart the gold-plated atmosphere that was familiar to business class. 40 passengers were dumbfounded, a few phones flashed, and most of them just stared blankly, not having time to breathe. Danielle swayed for a beat. The taste of blood spread in her mouth, and her cheeks burned as if she had been burned by fire. But when she looked up, her eyes were frighteningly cold, quiet. Not a single tear, not a single cry. There was only a heavy silence, as tense as a rope about to break. No one in the cabin knew that this slap was not the end. It is just the beginning of a storm that is forming, a storm that will engulf it all in an inescapable vortex. 90 minutes earlier, Los Angeles International Airport had buzzed with its usual chaos. Announcements crackling overhead, children crying, business people rushing toward their gates with coffee cups and carry-ons. Danielle had moved through it all like a ghost, unnoticed and unremarkable in her gray hoodie, faded jeans, and canvas tote bag slung over her shoulder. She'd checked in online under the name Danielle Brooks, her birth name, the one that appeared on her driver's license but nowhere in the corporate world. No assistant, no entourage, no first-class lounge access that would have triggered recognition. Just another passenger in a sea of thousands. Gate 42, Flight AL557 to New York, boarding Group 1. She'd handed her phone to the gate agent, watched the screen flash green, and walked down the jetway with her head down and her heart oddly calm. This was the fourth undercover trip she'd taken in 18 months, each one designed to experience her own airline the way regular customers did, the way black customers did. The previous 3 trips had revealed inefficiencies, yes, occasional rudeness, certainly, but nothing that had prepared her for what waited aboard this particular aircraft. Danielle stepped into the first-class cabin and immediately felt it, that subtle shift in atmosphere, like a temperature drop that had nothing to do with air conditioning. The cabin was beautiful. Soft lighting, leather seats the color of cream, warm wood accents that whispered luxury. Only 8 rows, 16 seats, room to breathe. She found 2A, the window seat she'd specifically selected. As she moved to stow her bag in the overhead compartment, she caught the first look. Susan Whitmore stood near the galley, speaking with a male flight attendant. Mid-40s, blonde hair pulled into a severe bun, her uniform crisp and perfectly pressed. She glanced up as Danielle passed, and something flickered across her face. Not quite surprise, not quite disgust, but something in between. Her eyes traveled from Danielle's hoodie to her jeans to her worn sneakers, then back up to her face, her brown face. The look lasted only 2 seconds, but Danielle felt it in her bones. She'd seen that look 1,000 times before, in country clubs, in boardrooms, in fancy restaurants where she'd arrived early for meetings. That look that said, "You must be lost. This isn't for you." Susan's lips pursed. She whispered something to her colleague, and both of them turned to stare. Danielle settled into 2A and pulled out her phone, not because she needed it, but because she needed something to do with her hands. Across the aisle, in seat 2C, a white man in an expensive suit looked up from his Wall Street Journal. Gregory Hayes, she didn't know his name yet, but she'd learn it later, gave her the same once-over Susan had. His eyes narrowed. He shook his head slightly as if witnessing something distasteful, then returned to his newspaper with a sharp snap of paper. 2 rows back, a young black woman in her late 20s glanced up from her phone. Their eyes met briefly. The woman offered a small, sympathetic smile, the kind that said, "I see you, I know what you're dealing with," before looking back down. Danielle exhaled slowly. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind. "Baby, dignity is something nobody can take from you. They can disrespect you, humiliate you, spit on you, but they can't touch what's inside unless you let them." She wouldn't let them. Susan approached, her heels clicking against the aircraft floor. "Excuse me," she said, her voice polite on the surface but edged with something sharp underneath. "May I see your boarding pass?" Danielle looked up. "Of course." She handed over her phone, the digital boarding pass glowing on the screen. Susan took it, held it at arm's length as if it might contaminate her. She studied it far longer than necessary, checking the name, the seat number, the confirmation code. Her colleague hovered behind her, watching. "Danielle Brooks," Susan read aloud, her tone making the name sound suspect. "Seat 2A." "That's correct," Danielle said evenly. Susan's jaw tightened. She handed the phone back, her fingers barely touching it. "And you purchased this ticket yourself?" The question hung in the air like poison. Danielle felt her pulse quicken, but her face remained calm. "Yes, I did." "I see." Susan didn't move. She stood there, blocking the aisle, as if waiting for Danielle to confess to something. Behind her, other passengers were boarding, forced to squeeze past. "Is there a problem?" Danielle asked quietly. Susan's smile was cold. "No problem. Just making sure everything is in order." She emphasized the last three words, as if order was something Danielle inherently disrupted. She walked away. But every few minutes, as Danielle sat waiting for departure, she felt Susan's eyes on her, watching, judging, waiting for her to do something wrong. The seeds had been planted, and Danielle knew, with sinking certainty, that they were about to take root. The cabin filled slowly. Business travelers, families, an elderly couple. Danielle watched Susan greet each passenger, smiles warmer for white faces, cooler for the few people of color who entered. 2 rows back, a young black woman in her late 20s had her phone out, thumb hovering over the camera icon. Ready. 10 minutes before departure, Susan returned with reinforcements. "Excuse me, Miss Brooks." A male flight attendant stood beside her, his name tag reading James. "We're showing a discrepancy with your seat assignment. Our system indicates there may have been an error during check-in." Danielle looked up calmly. "What kind of error?" "We'd like you to step off the aircraft and verify your ticket at the gate counter," Susan said quickly, "just to be safe." Passengers were starting to notice. Gregory Hayes lowered his newspaper. An older white woman craned her neck. "I checked in online this morning," Danielle said, pulling up her confirmation email. "Gate 42 scanned my boarding pass without issue." James barely glanced at her screen. "Company policy requires us to double-check when there's a system flag." "What flag?" Danielle asked. "What specifically is flagged?" Susan's mouth tightened. "That's not information we're at liberty to share." "So you're asking me to leave based on an unspecified flag, even though I've already been cleared by your gate agent?" The logic was unassailable, but logic had little to do with what was happening here. Susan's voice hardened. "Ma'am, if you're unable to cooperate, we'll have no choice but to involve airport security." Whispers rippled through the cabin. "She's refusing to show her ticket," someone muttered. "Probably didn't pay for it," Gregory Hayes added, loud enough for 3 rows to hear. The young woman behind them raised her phone slightly, pressing the volume button to start recording. Danielle felt the familiar weight, the burden of having to prove over and over that you belonged in spaces white people occupied without question. She could end this now. Invoke her real name, her real position. But she'd come here for a reason, to see what her black customers experienced. If she revealed herself now, she'd never know how deep this rot went. "I'd like to speak with the captain," Danielle said quietly. Susan's eyes flashed. "The captain is busy preparing for departure." "Then I'll wait, but I'm not leaving this aircraft without speaking to him first." Susan's face flushed, her hands clenching into fists. "Fine." She spun toward the cockpit, James trailing behind. Danielle pulled out her phone and typed quickly. "It's worse than I thought. Document everything." She sent it to Michael Carter, her VP of Operations in Atlanta. His response came instantly. Recording on our end. Say the word and I'll intervene. Not yet. Let it play out. Around her, whispers grew louder. Gregory Hayes stood, his imposing frame blocking the aisle. He looked down at Danielle with contempt. You know, the rest of us paid good money for these seats. Real money. We don't appreciate having our flight delayed because someone's trying to game the system. Danielle met his eyes. I paid for my seat. Just like you. He snorted. Sure you did. The elderly woman in 4B nodded. It's always something these days. No one wants to follow the rules anymore. The young woman's phone was openly recording now, held low but clearly capturing audio. Susan emerged from the cockpit with Captain Robert Fisher, late 50s, silver-haired, weathered face. He looked tired. Ms. Brooks, he said, his voice carrying authority. I understand there's a concern about your ticket. There's no concern with my ticket, Captain. Your staff seems to have manufactured one. His eyebrows rose. I'm sure this is just a misunderstanding, but to avoid further delay, perhaps you could step into the terminal and— Captain Fisher, Danielle interrupted gently. Are you asking me to leave this aircraft because of a legitimate security concern, or because your flight attendant doesn't think I look like I belong in first class? The question hung in the air. Fisher's face reddened. Behind him, Susan's expression twisted into something ugly. How dare you accuse me of— Susan breathed. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm asking a question, and I'd like an answer. Fisher looked between them, clearly calculating. This could turn into an incident. Bad press. Or he could simply ask this young black woman in a hoodie, who probably didn't have the resources to fight back, to leave quietly. The mathematics of power were simple, brutal, and Danielle knew exactly what he was going to say. Captain Fisher cleared his throat, his decision already written in the apologetic downturn of his eyes. Apologetic not to Danielle, but to the other passengers whose time was being wasted. Ms. Brooks, I'm going to have to ask you to deplane. We can sort this out at the gate, and if everything checks out, we'll get you on the next available flight. The words landed like a verdict. Guilty until proven innocent, guilty of being black in first class. I'm not getting off this plane, Danielle said quietly. I have a valid ticket. I've broken no laws. I've violated no policies. And I'm not leaving. Gregory Hayes stepped closer, his voice booming. Oh, for God's sake, just get off the damn plane. You're holding up everyone. I'm not holding up anyone, Danielle replied, her voice still calm but her hands trembling slightly in her lap. Your flight attendant is holding up this flight by refusing to do her job properly. Susan's face went scarlet. My job is to ensure the safety and comfort of all passengers, and right now, you're disrupting both. By sitting in my assigned seat? By refusing to cooperate with crew instructions. Susan's voice rose, shrill and sharp. Do you know what we can do to passengers who don't comply with crew member directives? Do you have any idea the regulations we can invoke? There it was. The threat wrapped in bureaucracy. The power to eject, to ban, to punish. Power that was supposed to protect passengers but too often became a weapon against those who didn't fit the mold. An older white man in 3C spoke up, his voice dripping with condescension. Young lady, if you can't afford first class, there's no shame in that. But trying to scam your way in, that's just trashy. I didn't scam anything, Danielle said, her voice harder now. Then why won't you just cooperate? A woman called from row 5. Because I shouldn't have to prove I belong here more than anyone else in this cabin. The silence that followed was suffocating. Danielle had said what everyone was thinking, but no one wanted to acknowledge. She'd named the thing that polite society preferred to keep buried. Gregory Hayes laughed, a cruel, brittle sound. Oh, here we go, playing the race card. That's what people like you always do when you get caught. People like me? Danielle repeated slowly. What kind of people are those, Mr. Hayes? His smile was vicious. People who buy tickets they can't afford with credit cards they're probably maxing out. People who think they're entitled to luxury they haven't earned. People with brown skin? Danielle finished for him. His face flushed, but he didn't deny it. Neither did the others who'd been nodding along. Susan seized the moment, her voice turning cold and clinical. "I'm calling security. This passenger is being belligerent and non-compliant." She pulled out her phone, her fingers shaking, not with fear but with righteous fury. 15 years she'd worked this job. 15 years of maintaining standards, of knowing who belonged and who didn't. And this woman, this girl in a hoodie, dared to question her judgment? Susan's grandmother's voice echoed in her mind, the same words she'd heard growing up in suburban Connecticut. "There's a natural order to things, Susan. Some people understand that. Others need to be taught." She tapped a number. "Yes, this is lead attendant Whitmore on Atlas Air Flight AL557, Gate 42. We have a passenger refusing to deplane after multiple requests from crew. We need security immediately." Danielle felt her chest tighten. This was it, the point where things spiraled beyond control, where she'd be escorted off in handcuffs, photographed, turned into another viral video of a black person being removed from a plane. Another story that people would debate online, half of them insisting she must have done something to deserve it. She pulled out her phone and typed another message to Michael. "They're calling security. Still holding." His response was immediate. "I can end this now. Just say the word." Her thumb hovered over the keyboard. It would be so easy. One text, 5 words. "Tell them who I am." But Maya, the young woman 2 rows back, was recording everything. And beyond Maya, millions of black passengers who flew every year, who got randomly selected for extra screening, who watched white passengers breeze through while they were questioned, searched, doubted. If Danielle revealed herself now, the system would protect itself. Apologize. Claim this was an isolated incident. Nothing would change. She had to let it play out. Had to feel what they felt. She typed back, "Not yet." 2 airport security officers appeared in the jetway, a white man in his 40s and a black woman in her 30s. They boarded, their uniforms and badges immediately commanding attention. "What's the situation?" the male officer asked. Susan launched into her prepared speech. "This passenger has been asked multiple times to verify her ticket at the gate counter due to a system discrepancy. She's refused all crew instructions and has become verbally aggressive." "That's a lie," Danielle said evenly. "I've been nothing but calm. I showed my ticket. It's valid. They simply don't believe I belong in first class." The female security officer, her name tag read Officer Williams, studied Danielle for a long moment. Something flickered in her eyes. Recognition, perhaps. Not of Danielle's face, but of the situation. How many times had she seen this script play out? "Ma'am," Williams said gently, "can I see your boarding pass?" Danielle handed over her phone. Williams examined it carefully, then checked something on her own device. "This boarding pass is valid. Seat 2A confirmed and paid in full." Susan's face went rigid. "But the system—" "What system flag, specifically?" Williams asked. Susan faltered. The system indicated—" "There's no flag on this passenger," Williams said, her voice taking on an edge. "No security concerns, no payment issues, nothing." The air in the cabin shifted. Passengers who'd been so certain of Danielle's guilt now looked uncertain. Gregory Hayes sat down abruptly, his newspaper forgotten. But Susan wasn't finished. 15 years of authority, 15 years of being right, 15 years of knowing her place in the hierarchy. It couldn't end like this, not because of her. "She's lying about something," Susan insisted, her voice rising. "I know she is. Look at her. Look at her. Does she look like someone who flies first class?" There it was. The mask finally dropped. The unspoken assumption made spoken. Officer Williams's face hardened. "Ma'am," That's not... I've been doing this job for 15 years. Susan's voice cracked. I know who belongs in first class. I know. And she doesn't. She doesn't. The cabin was dead silent now. Even Gregory Hayes looked uncomfortable. Danielle stood up slowly, her full height bringing her eye to eye with Susan. When she spoke, her voice was soft, but carried to every corner of the cabin. You're right about one thing, she said. These procedures, these random checks, these system flags, these assumptions about who looks like they belong, they aren't random at all. They target a very specific group of people. But here's what you don't know, Ms. Whitmore. She paused, let the moment stretch. You have no idea who you're actually dealing with. Susan's eyes narrowed to slits. The warning in Danielle's voice should have registered, should have triggered some instinct for self-preservation. But 15 years of unchallenged authority had calcified into arrogance, and arrogance made people deaf to warnings. Is that a threat? Susan asked, her voice low and dangerous. It's a statement of fact, Danielle replied. Officer Williams stepped between them, her hand raised. Okay, everyone needs to take a breath. Ms. Brooks, your ticket is valid. You have every right to be on this flight. She turned to Susan. Ma'am, unless you have a legitimate safety concern, and I mean legitimate, this passenger stays on the aircraft. Susan's jaw clenched so hard Danielle could hear her teeth grinding. Fine, she spat. Fine, but if anything happens during this flight, anything, it's on the record that I objected. Noted, Williams said dryly. She nodded to Danielle. I'm sorry for the inconvenience, ma'am. Enjoy your flight. The security officers left. Captain Fisher retreated to the cockpit without another word. The passengers began to settle, their attention turning to phones and magazines, though the whispers continued. Quieter now, but no less poisonous. Danielle sat down, her heart hammering against her ribs. Maya caught her eye from 2 rows back and gave a small, supportive nod. Her phone was still out, still recording. Susan remained standing in the galley, her face a mask of barely controlled rage. She whispered something to James, who glanced at Danielle and then quickly looked away. Whatever Susan was planning, it wasn't over. The aircraft door closed. The gate agent's voice crackled over the PA system. Flight attendants, prepare for departure. Danielle exhaled slowly. Maybe, just maybe, she could make it to New York without further incident. Maybe Susan would swallow her pride and do her job. Maybe... Susan began her walk down the aisle for the pre-flight safety check. When she reached row 2, she stopped beside Danielle's seat. Her smile was glacial. I'll be watching you, Susan whispered, quiet enough that only Danielle could hear. Every move, every breath, and the second you step out of line, I will have you arrested the moment we land. Danielle looked up at her, keeping her expression neutral. I don't plan to step out of line, Ms. Whitmore. I'm just here to fly to New York. We'll see about that. Susan moved on, but her words lingered like smoke. 20 minutes into the flight, as the plane reached cruising altitude, the seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers began moving about the cabin. Danielle pulled out her laptop, intending to get some work done. Actual work, the kind that came with running a billion-dollar airline. Susan appeared with the beverage cart, James pushing from behind. She served the row in front of Danielle with practiced efficiency. Champagne for the businessman in 1C, sparkling water for the woman in 1D. Then she reached row 2. She looked at Gregory Hayes first. What can I get for you, sir? Bourbon, neat, top shelf. He didn't look up from his phone. Absolutely. We have Woodford Reserve. Perfect. Susan prepared his drink with careful attention, placing it on his tray table with a cocktail napkin. Then she turned to Danielle. And for you? Her voice was flat, stripped of the warmth she'd offered Hayes. Ginger ale, please. Susan's lip curled almost imperceptibly. She grabbed a can from the cart, popped it open, and placed it directly on Danielle's tray table. No glass, no ice, no napkin, just a can, sweating condensation. Danielle stared at it for a moment, then looked up at Susan. "Could I have a glass, please?" "We're running low on glassware, you understand." Susan's smile was sharp as a knife. 2 rows back, a white passenger had just received champagne in a proper flute. 3 rows ahead, another passenger sipped water from a glass, but Danielle got a can. Gregory Hayes noticed. He smirked. "Should have flown coach," he muttered, just loud enough to be heard. Danielle ignored him, popped the tab on her ginger ale, and took a sip. "Dignity," her grandmother had said. "Don't let them take your dignity." An hour later, Danielle needed to use the restroom. She stood, smoothed her hoodie, and walked toward the front lavatory. The vacant sign glowed green. She reached for the handle. "Excuse me," Susan's voice cut through the cabin. "That lavatory is for crew use only." Danielle turned. "The sign says it's vacant. Crew, use, only." Susan enunciated each word like she was speaking to a child. "The lavatory in the back is occupied," Danielle said, glancing down the aisle where the occupied light glowed red. "Then you'll have to wait." Gregory Hayes chose that moment to stand up and head for the same front lavatory. Susan said nothing. He went inside, closed the door, and the lock clicked into place. The message was clear. Some passengers were more equal than others. Danielle walked back to her seat, her face burning. Around her, passengers pretended not to notice, but she could feel their eyes. Some looked away uncomfortably. Others watched with satisfaction, as if justice was being served. Maya was openly recording again. Her face was set in hard lines, her eyes blazing. The flight was 3 hours in when things finally exploded. Lunch service had begun. Susan and James worked their way through the cabin with practiced efficiency. The passengers in rows 1 and 3 received their meals with cloth napkins and real silverware. When Susan reached Danielle, she dropped a plastic-wrapped sandwich on her tray table. "What's this?" Danielle asked quietly. "Your meal. Everyone else is getting the hot lunch option. We've run out." Susan's smile didn't reach her eyes. "There are only 16 seats in first class. You couldn't have run out." "Well, we did. You're welcome to purchase something from our economy menu if you'd like." Susan held out a laminated card showing overpriced snack boxes. Danielle looked at the passengers around her, all eating hot meals, chicken, pasta, fresh salads. Then she looked at the cold sandwich in front of her, the final insult in a series of calculated humiliations. "I'd like to speak with the captain," Danielle said. "The captain is flying the plane. Then I'd like to file a formal complaint." Susan's expression darkened. "You can file whatever you want when we land. Now please, you're holding up service." "I'm holding up service because you're refusing to do your job." "I'm doing my job just fine." Susan's voice rose. "You're the one causing problems. You've been causing problems since you boarded this aircraft." Passengers were staring now, all pretense of privacy abandoned. Gregory Hayes stood up, his imposing 6'3" frame moving into the aisle. "Jesus Christ, lady. Just eat your sandwich and shut up. Some of us are trying to enjoy our flight." "I paid the same price as everyone else on this plane," Danielle said, her voice steady despite the rage building in her chest. "I deserve the same service." "You deserve what you get," Hayes shot back. He looked around the cabin, appealing to his fellow passengers. "Am I right? We've all been dealing with her attitude since we boarded. She picks a fight with the crew, holds up departure, now she's complaining about a sandwich?" A few passengers nodded. The older white woman from 4B spoke up. "My husband and I have been flying for 40 years. We've never seen such entitled behavior." "Entitled?" Danielle stood up, her calm finally cracking. "I'm asking for basic service I've already paid for. That's not entitled. That's fair." "Nothing's ever fair enough for people like you," Hayes said, his mask slipping further. "Always complaining. Always playing the victim, Maybe if you'd shown some class from the beginning, you'd be treated with some." The words hung in the air like a grenade with the pin pulled. Maya stood up from her seat, phone held high. "I've been recording everything," she said loudly. "Every single thing. The way she was treated at boarding, the way she was questioned. No glass for her drink, no access to the bathroom, no hot meal, all of it. And all of you just sat there and watched." Several passengers shifted uncomfortably. A businessman in row 5 looked genuinely ashamed. But others, Hayes, the elderly couple, a woman in a designer pantsuit, remained defiant. "Put that phone away," Susan snapped at Maya. "No, I'm a paying customer. I'm allowed to record in public spaces." "You're creating a disturbance." "I'm documenting discrimination." The cabin erupted. Some passengers shouted at Maya to sit down. Others argued back. The businessman in 5 asked why no one had said anything earlier. Hayes called him a social justice warrior. An argument broke out in row 6 about whether race had anything to do with what was happening. Danielle stood frozen in the center of the chaos she'd unleashed, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. Captain Fisher's voice crackled over the PA system. "Flight attendants, please come to the cockpit immediately." Susan shot Danielle a look of pure hatred. "You've done it now," she hissed. "You've turned this entire flight into a circus. I hope you're proud of yourself." "I'm not the one who should be ashamed," Danielle said quietly. Susan's hand moved faster than thought. A blur of motion, instinct overriding training, 15 years of professionalism evaporating in a single second of rage. The slap echoed through the cabin like a gunshot. Danielle's head snapped to the side. The metallic taste of blood filled her mouth. For a moment, everything went silent. Not quiet, but truly silent, as if the world itself had stopped breathing. Then the cabin exploded into chaos. Passengers screamed. Someone shouted for a doctor. Maya's phone was still recording, capturing every second. Danielle straightened slowly, touched her split lip, and looked at the blood on her fingers. When she raised her eyes to meet Susan's, her expression was eerily calm. "That," she said softly, "was a mistake." Susan's face had gone white. Her hand trembled at her side. Whatever satisfaction she'd felt in that moment of violence was already curdling into horror as she realized what she'd done. Captain Fisher burst from the cockpit. "What the hell is going on out here?" Danielle pulled out her phone with steady hands. "Michael," she said clearly as she dialed, "I need you now." The phone rang once, twice. Then Michael Carter's voice filled the cabin through her phone's speaker, calm and professional and utterly devastating. "Yes, Miss Jackson, I'm here. Tell me what you need." The cabin went silent again. This time people heard the name. Jackson, not Brooks. Susan's face transformed from white to gray. "Jackson?" she whispered. Danielle smiled, a small, cold smile that held no warmth and less mercy. "Miss Whitmore," she said quietly, "I believe we need to have a conversation." The name hung in the air like smoke after an explosion. Jackson. Susan's lips moved soundlessly. Her brain struggled to process what her ears had just heard, to reconcile the woman in the gray hoodie with the name that appeared on every Atlas Air corporate document, every company email, every quarterly report. Danielle Jackson, CEO, owner of 60% of Atlas Air's outstanding shares. The woman she'd just slapped. "No," Susan breathed. "No, that's not. You can't be—" Danielle kept the phone on speaker. "Michael, I'm on flight AL557. I've been conducting an undercover service evaluation. I need you to confirm my identity for the crew and passengers." Michael Carter's voice came through clear and authoritative, carrying to every corner of the silent cabin. "Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michael Carter, Vice President of Operations for Atlas Air. I'm calling to confirm that Ms. Danielle Jackson, who checked in under her birth name, Danielle Brooks, is indeed the chief executive officer and majority shareholder of this airline. She has been conducting an anonymous customer experience audit. Captain Fisher's face went the color of old newspaper. Ms. Jackson, I didn't... You didn't know, Danielle finished, her voice eerily calm despite the blood on her lip. No one knew. That was the point. I wanted to experience Atlas Air the way our black customers do. She paused. Now I have. Gregory Hayes had collapsed into his seat, his earlier bravado evaporating. The elderly couple stared at their hands, but Susan was shaking her head, backing away, her mind refusing to accept reality. I didn't know, Susan whispered. How could I know? You were dressed like... You looked like... Like what, Ms. Whitmore? Danielle's voice cut like a scalpel. Please, finish that sentence. Susan's mouth opened and closed. You meant every word, every look, every action. Danielle touched her split lip. The question now is what we do about it. She turned to Captain Fisher. Captain, turn this aircraft around. We're returning to LAX immediately. Miss Jackson, if we turn around now, we'll have to dump fuel. The costs... I own the airline, Captain. I'm aware of the costs. Turn us around. Fisher nodded mutely and retreated to the cockpit. Within seconds, passengers felt the aircraft banking back toward Los Angeles. Michael, I need you to conference in legal, HR, and the executive board. Already done, Michael replied. They're standing by. Ms. Jackson, are you injured? I'll be fine, but I need a full investigation team waiting when we land. Pull the cabin recordings, pull the gate recordings, document everything. Consider it done. She looked at Susan, who seemed to have aged 10 years in 5 minutes. Ms. Whitmore, you are suspended effective immediately. Security will escort you off when we land. HR will contact you regarding termination of employment. You can't, Susan started, then stopped. Because Danielle could. She owned the airline. James, Danielle said, turning to the male flight attendant, were you aware that Ms. Whitmore's treatment of me was discriminatory? James swallowed hard. I thought maybe she was being harsh, but... Did you say anything? Did you try to stop her? His silence was answer enough. You're also suspended, pending investigation. Danielle's gaze swept to Gregory Hayes. Mr. Hayes, you accused me of fraud, told me to shut up, and said people like me don't understand fairness. You're banned from Atlas Air. For life. Hayes's face reddened. You can't do that. I fly first class every week. You assaulted a passenger with your words. You're done. Maya stood up, phone still recording. Miss Jackson, I'm Maya Richardson. I've been documenting everything. I have video evidence of the entire incident. Danielle's expression softened. Thank you, Ms. Richardson. That video is going to be very important. Share it with our legal team, but also post it publicly. People need to see what happened here. Maya nodded. It's already viral. I posted it the second she hit you. Good. Danielle looked around the cabin. Some passengers looked ashamed, others terrified, a few still defiant. Let me be very clear, Danielle said, her voice carrying to every seat. What happened today is not an isolated incident. It happens every day to thousands of passengers who look like me. The difference is that this time, the person being discriminated against had the power to do something about it. And I'm going to use that power. She looked at Susan, crying silently now. This isn't about revenge, Ms. Whitmore. This is about accountability. You didn't just attack me today. You attacked every black person who's ever been questioned in first class. Every passenger who's been told they don't belong. Today that stops, at least on my airline. Captain Fisher's voice came over the PA. Ladies and gentlemen, we're returning to Los Angeles due to an onboard incident. We'll be landing in approximately 35 minutes. Danielle sat back down in 2A, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the ache in her jaw and a bone-deep weariness. Michael's voice came through her phone, quieter now. "Danielle, are you okay?" She closed her eyes. "Ask me when we land, Michael." But she already knew the answer. She wouldn't be okay for a long time, because now she understood what it meant to be powerless, and she would spend the rest of her career making sure no passenger on her airline ever felt that way again. The aircraft touched down at LAX 38 minutes later. Through the windows, Danielle could see what awaited: 3 security vehicles, 2 news vans, and a cluster of Atlas Air executives in dark suits standing on the tarmac. The aircraft door opened. 6 security officers boarded, followed by Michael Carter in person and Jennifer Walsh, the company's chief legal officer. Michael's eyes found Danielle immediately. He knelt beside her seat, his voice low. "Are you hurt?" She touched her swollen lip. "I'm fine, but we need to move quickly before the narrative gets away from us." "It already has." Michael showed her his tablet. Maya's video had 3 million views in 40 minutes. The hashtag #RAtlasAirSlap was trending worldwide. CNN is calling, so is the New York Times. Jennifer Walsh stepped forward. "Ms. Jackson, I need to document your injuries and get your statement. Ms. Whitmore and Mr. James are being placed under immediate suspension." She turned toward Susan, frozen in the jump seat near the galley, face blotchy from crying. "Susan Whitmore, you are hereby suspended from all duties with Atlas Air, effective immediately. Surrender your credentials and exit with security." Susan nodded mutely. "James Morrison, the same applies to you." James looked sick. "I didn't hit anyone." "You enabled discrimination and failed to intervene. That's enough." Jennifer's voice was ice. "Surrender your credentials." With shaking hands, both flight attendants removed their ID badges and wings pins. Susan stared at the metal in her palm, 15 years reduced to props in a security bag. As Susan passed Danielle's seat, she stopped. Her eyes were red, her face aged beyond recognition. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean—" "You did mean it," Danielle said quietly. "You just never thought you'd face consequences." Susan's face crumpled. The officers guided her away. Gregory Hayes was next. "Sir, you need to come with us." "On what grounds?" Hayes blustered. Michael stepped forward. "You've been banned from our airline permanently, Mr. Hayes. You'll receive formal notification within 72 hours. "This is ridiculous. I spend over $50,000 a year on your airline." "You spent $50,000. Past tense. Now please exit, or these officers will remove you." Hayes grabbed his carry-on and stormed off, muttering about lawyers. Jennifer approached the elderly couple. "Mr. and Mrs. Patterson, you'll receive a formal letter. Your frequent flyer status is under review, and you'll be required to complete anti-discrimination training before your next flight." The old woman was still crying. "We're so sorry." "You understood perfectly," Danielle said wearily. "You just chose the wrong side." Within 20 minutes, the investigation team had photographed injuries, collected statements, and secured video evidence. Outside, news vans had multiplied to 7. Michael sat beside Danielle. "The board wants to issue a statement. They're proposing an apology, but they want to emphasize this was individual employees, not company policy." Danielle's eyes hardened. "No, this wasn't just individual employees. Our hiring, training, company culture, they all failed. If we blame one flight attendant, we learn nothing." She stood. "I'll write the statement myself, and it's going to acknowledge systemic problems." 5 days later, after comprehensive investigation, interviews with dozens of employees and passengers, reviewing years of complaints, analyzing training materials, the results were devastating. Susan Whitmore, terminated for cause. No airline would hire her again. James Morrison, 6-month unpaid suspension, mandatory retraining. Gregory Hayes, banned for life from Atlas Air, flagged in the industry database. 3 other flight attendants with patterns of discriminatory behavior, placed under review. But the real earthquake came in Atlas Air's public statement, delivered by Danielle herself at a press conference live-streamed to millions. "We failed," she said simply, her split lip still visible. "Not just on flight AL557, but for years before. We failed every passenger treated with suspicion because of their skin color. We failed every employee who witnessed discrimination and didn't feel empowered to stop it. Today, that failure ends." The stock took a 12% hit in 2 days, but the company survived. And more importantly, it began to change. 2 weeks after the incident, Danielle sat across from Oprah Winfrey in a television studio in Los Angeles. The interview had been scheduled within days of the video going viral, and now 40 million people were watching live. Oprah leaned forward, her expression compassionate. "Danielle, you could have revealed your identity at any point during that flight. You could have ended your suffering with a single sentence. Why didn't you?" Danielle was quiet for a moment, choosing her words carefully. "Because ending my suffering wouldn't have changed anything for the millions of Black passengers who experience this every single day. They don't have a CEO card to pull out. They don't have the power to fire their abusers or turn the plane around. They just have to endure it, swallow their dignity, and keep moving. I needed to feel that, to understand it completely. And now that you do, now I know that what happened to me on that flight wasn't about one racist flight attendant. It was about a system that allowed her racism to flourish unchecked for 15 years. A system that trained employees to see certain passengers as threats rather than customers. A system that prioritized order and compliance over dignity and justice." Danielle's voice was steady, but her eyes burned with purpose. "I didn't do this for revenge. I did it because I have a responsibility. To every person who's ever been told they don't belong. Every child who's been taught that their skin color makes them suspect. Every parent who's had to explain to their kids why they were treated differently." Oprah nodded slowly. "You've announced a $10 million fund dedicated to anti-discrimination training across the airline industry, not just Atlas Air, but all carriers. Tell me about that." "Discrimination isn't an Atlas Air problem. It's an industry problem, a societal problem." Danielle sat forward. "That $10 million will fund comprehensive training programs, create independent oversight committees, establish clear reporting mechanisms for passengers who experience discrimination, and provide support for employees who speak up when they witness it. Because silence is how this continues. Silence is how Susan Whitmore felt empowered to slap a passenger she thought was powerless." "What would you say to people watching right now who have experienced similar treatment?" Danielle looked directly into the camera. "I see you. I believe you. And I want you to know that your dignity is not up for debate. It doesn't matter what you're wearing, how much money you have, or what you look like. You deserve respect. You deserve justice. And when you don't receive it, document it. Record it. Share it. Make noise. Because the only way we change broken systems is by refusing to suffer in silence." She paused, her voice softening. "To the Susan Whitmores of the world, the people who've been taught that some lives matter less than others, I want you to understand something. Your prejudice doesn't just hurt us. It diminishes you. It robs you of your humanity. And one day you'll realize that the person you should have been most ashamed of was yourself." Oprah's eyes glistened. "That's powerful, Danielle. Thank you for your courage." After the interview aired, the $10 million fund was fully operational within 30 days. 6 major airlines signed on to implement the training programs. Congress launched hearings on discrimination in air travel, and most importantly, passengers began speaking up, filming incidents, filing complaints, refusing to accept mistreatment as the price of flying while Black. Change was slow, imperfect, but it was happening. And it had started with one woman refusing to be silent in seat 2A. 6 months after the incident, Danielle stood before a packed auditorium at the National Civil Rights Museum in Memphis. The audience was a mix of activists, airline employees, students, and everyday people who'd been moved by her story. Maya Richardson sat in the third row, her phone ready, not to document injustice this time, but to capture hope. Danielle's voice rang clear and strong. "I'm often asked if I regret what happened on that flight. If I wish I'd revealed my identity sooner, spared myself the humiliation, the violence, the pain." She paused, touched the faint scar on her lip. "The answer is no, because that pain taught me something I could never have learned in a boardroom or from a quarterly report. It taught me what powerlessness feels like, and that lesson was worth every second." She looked out across the sea of faces: brown, black, white, young, old. "Here's what I want you to understand. Change doesn't happen because powerful people suddenly develop consciences. Change happens because ordinary people refuse to accept injustice. Maya Richardson, a graduate student with a phone camera, did more to transform the airline industry than 1,000 corporate memos ever could. She saw something wrong and she acted. That's power." The audience erupted in applause. Maya wiped her eyes. "So here's my challenge to you," Danielle continued. "If you witness discrimination, on a plane, in a store, at work, anywhere, don't look away. Record it, report it, share it. Your silence protects the system. Your voice dismantles it. Every single one of you has more power than you realize. Use it." She smiled then, a glint of mischief in her eyes. "And to anyone out there who's tempted to judge someone based on their appearance, their clothes, or the color of their skin, let me leave you with this thought." She paused for effect. "That person in the hoodie sitting next to you in first class, the one you're looking down on, the one you assume doesn't belong." Her smile widened. "They might just own the plane. They might just own the company. They might just have the power to end your career with a phone call." Laughter rippled through the audience, but beneath it was a harder truth. "But more importantly," Danielle said, her voice turning serious again, "they're a human being who deserves your respect. Not because of what they own or who they are, but simply because they exist. Respect isn't granted by status or earned by wealth. It's a fundamental right, and it's enforced by action." She raised her fist, and the audience rose with her. Respect isn't given by status. It's earned by character and enforced by action. The words became a chant, filling the auditorium, spilling out into the streets, spreading across social media feeds and news broadcasts. A rallying cry, a promise, a warning. 3 rows back, Maya recorded every second, her thumb already hovering over the share button. This time, the story being told wasn't about injustice. It was about triumph.